it's time to start. I reckon there might be a few more that drift in, but I would like to keep on time. Thank you very much for coming. I'm from ProfitAbility. My name is Nigel Downing. I'm the MD there, and irreverently I'm sometimes called ND the MD. So, my talk today is HR and the bottom line, and I've got a little journey to take you through. The first point is, what is the evidence that HR makes a bean of a difference? I choose my words carefully because if I were a bean counter, and I'm not, I may well ask you how many beans you've delivered to your organization as a result of your HR activities over the past month, or quarter, or even year. As an HR specialist, can you convince me in beans what value you contribute? In other words, does HR contribute to the bottom line, to the profit of the organization, and if so, how so? In my journey through the corporate world, I know for sure that HR is a massive contributor to the bottom line. Can and should shout it from the rooftops and really show how many beans make five. Why am I so convinced? Well, to explain this, I have to reveal to you something of my embarrassing past, and never before have I made this so public in such a humiliating way. The thing of it is, I love fish. I can't remember when it was when I began to love fish, but we have clear evidence here that at about the age of 18 or so, I came out, as they say. So in terms of career path, I studied for far too long and headed out to research coral reefs. Their beauty absolutely enthralled me. This is the island of Al Muradim, which is off Kuwait in the northern Gulf. And islands such as these became my stomping ground, and they were the home to lots of fish. Such as this one. This is a little goby called Amblyeleotris downingi. When I asked the ichthyologist who named it why he named it after me, he replied, well, first thing, Nigel, you helped me discover it. But the second is I actually had two fish to name, and this was the ugly one. Actually, in day-to-day life, this is quite useful, because when people ask me my name, I say Nigel Downing, as in the street. This is to avoid confusion with Dowling or even Browning. But I suppose now I could say Nigel Downing, as in Amblyeleotris. I also studied the corals themselves, and I'm sure you will agree that this is quite a pretty specimen. But I digress. What's this got to do with HR and the bottom line? Well, Kuwait is the land of the camel. And while I was in Kuwait, I came across for the first time as a young research scientist the absolute power of HR. It happened like this. I met a man called Ishmael who had 17 camels. By the way, does anybody know this riddle? The riddle of the camels? Yes? One person? Maybe. Okay. Well, Ishmael had 17 camels. He was a camel trader. And these 17 camels were kind of in surplus supply. And he had 3 sons to whom he wanted to give these 17 camels. Ahmed was the elder son, Khaled the middle one, and Abdul Latif Hamad Dafallah was the third son. To the first, quite rightly, he wanted to give half of his 17 camels. To the second one, Khaled, he wanted to give a third, and to Abdul Latif Hamad Dafallah, he wanted to give a ninth. The only problem, as you can see from some simple mathematics, is that 2 doesn't really go into 17 without leaving some messy bits. And certainly 3 doesn't go into 17, and poor Abdul Latif at the bottom here would not even get 2 camels, and you need at least 2 to have a breeding herd. Ishmael, therefore, had a bit of a problem, and it turned out to be a bit of an HR problem as well, because his 3 sons were working with him in the business, and they really wanted their share of the camels. So being a wise man, Ishmael turned to his HR specialist called Moana. And Moana had a lot going for her. One of the things was that she was good at HR. The second thing was that she was very good at numbers. And the third was that she happened to have a camel. So she said to Ishmael, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you a camel, and let's see if that helps." Now Ishmael has 18 camels. He gave half to Ahmed, as planned, and that was 9. He gave a third to Khaled, and that was 6. Abdul Latif got 2, because 9 into 18 goes twice, and there was 1 camel left over, which went back to Moana. Very clever. Now the serious side of this is that numbers can give all sorts of challenges to organizations. Back in the 1990s, Diageo got quite excited by a financial metric called EP. Does anybody out there know what EP stands for? Show of hands? No one. Well, the reason why they got so excited about EP, which stands for economic profit, is that if you were to measure just one thing in a business financially, economic profit is the one item that over the long period tracks the closest to share price. I'm not sure if any of you went to the talk by John Mahoney Phillips yesterday, but dominating the top of his slide was something called TSR, Total Shareholder Return, and he said that free cash flow drives it. Now, most people haven't seen free cash flow in a business all their lives, let alone what drives free cash flow. But EP happens to be something that most people can get a handle on and understand what they can do to drive it, and therefore the share price in the long term of the business. So this is why Diageo got so excited. What they wanted to do was to target the top 4 businesses, and they were taking the first 200 people of their 4 businesses at that time. And just to remind you, at that time, Diageo had United Distillers and Vintners, they had Guinness, this brand here, they had Burger King, and they had Pillsbury. They've since got rid of Burger King and Pillsbury. The problem they faced is that these top executives, if you like, the top echelons of each of these 4 businesses, were bonused on their economic profit performance. And none of them knew how to calculate it, let alone what drove it. And that's why we were called in to try and help. And help we did by producing what you will see here as a schematic of a board-based business simulation. This is a hands-on way of learning how money flows through a business. Every decision you make, money goes somewhere. So you can actually see the results of your decisions. It's a technology that's worked for a long time, and in my opinion is still, for this particular purpose of teaching business and financial acumen, is probably still the most effective way of doing it. But we stumbled upon a problem of perception. And I know that some people were talking about that in some of the sessions earlier. The perception was this: we've got these real hotshots at the top of the business. We're going to put them in front of something that looks like Monopoly on steroids. Are they going to take this seriously? So I said, well, you've got a point. Let's think up a solution. And the solution was this. The class would arrive, very senior people. Some of them would get quite excited that they were going to play a game for a couple of days. Some of them were a little bit skeptical. You could see this kind of stuff going on. But in the introduction, our facilitators would say, well, we're looking really at the end of the day at economic profit. Do you really understand what it is? Do you understand what drives it? And I know you folks probably know a bit about it, so here's just a kind of warm-up exercise for you, and you hand this out on all the tables. Here are some basic figures. Please, out there, don't start yawning yet. It's just for illustration. Here are some basic figures of a business. Calculate the EP. Take your time. And I'll just gather up the answers afterwards and put them on the table, so we're not going to have a big kind of debate on how you do it. So there'd be a lot of licking of pencils and scratching of paper and so on, and eventually the bits of paper would accumulate and we put them aside. That changed the attitude instantly. Because when we started to look at the data, 98% of this target population got it wrong. Only 2% got it right. Now, that actually shocked us. We thought, what on earth's going on? So we started to analyze how they had done the calculation, because remember, we had their bits of paper. And how they'd done the calculation broke down into one fundamental problem, and that was that they could not, most of them, distinguish between what of those things there belong to a profit and loss account and what belongs to a balance sheet. Now, a profit and loss account and a balance sheet, although some of you may not get too involved in them, but some of you may, are absolutely fundamental to the understanding of how well a business is working financially. So they had a very, very fundamental bottom problem, if you like, that we had to overcome, and we did it through these business simulations. This, by the way, as I've gone through over 20 years of teaching and facilitating various forms of simulation out in the industry, is not atypical. It's actually quite easy at the end of the day to get this basic knowledge into a group of people, provided you do use, if I can call it, a total engagement methodology. If you're going to do by chalk and talk, you'll kill people. The next challenge, really, though, is beyond that. It's getting people to recognize that they do actually make a financial difference to the company, be it to the profit or to the cash flow, or indeed share value. And sadly, the function that grapples hardest with this, and here I stress wrongly so, is HR. In so doing, I believe they are doing themselves a great disservice. Now, as I say, out of every function that passes through our hands, HR is the one that generally is at a loss as to how they actually impact the finances of the business. The typical response to the question of how they would do that is rather a kind of embarrassed, well, I'm a cost. At first I used to be polite in my response to that, and now, and I think it's the grey hairs that are helping, my immediate challenge is, well, really, if you're simply a cost to the organization, we can get rid of you and save the company a bundle and a lot of beans. Now that, by saying that, I then get their attention, of course, and normally I receive a rather tart, well, I do add value, you know. And actually, they're quite right. Of course they add value. The only problem is in their difficulty in quantifying it. And the reason they can't do that is simply because they don't feel comfortable with the numbers. Now, I'll come back to this, but meanwhile, I want to take you down another little journey.